Well, good morning and welcome to our adult Sunday school class here at Calvary Baptist Church. So glad that you could join us. It is a beautiful day outside and it is a wonderful day to spend time in the Word of God. And we are working our way through in our Sunday school class through the book of Proverbs. We're doing a topical study from the book of wisdom. And over the last number of weeks, we've been looking at relationships, what the book of Proverbs has to say about all the different relationships that we have. So family and husbands and wives and children and how we are to interact and the wisdom that God has for each one of those different groups. This morning we have a few verses as we finish up this topic in the book. Next week we'll move on to a completely different topic, but this week we're finishing up on relationships. And there's a few verses and several different topics that have just a few verses here and there that we are going to grab this morning and talk through. The first one is, there are a couple of verses that deal with grandparents. And so we're going to begin in Proverbs 13 and verse 22. Proverbs 13:22. A good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. Although this falls into the category of grandparents, it specifically talks about them, the principle is has a much wider application. It's a very, very clearly laid out. A good man lays up treasure for his, or leaves an inheritance for his children's children. So a good man leaves an inheritance for his grandchildren. And the whole purpose of that, the primary thrust of it, is to help us understand and to see that a good man does not spend everything on himself, doesn't use up what he has, but he is invested not only in his children, but in his children's children. He is using his everything that he has. An inheritance, it could have been money or land or goods of all kinds. And so it says a good man, it invests what he has. Doesn't just spend up everything that he gets, but he has a long-term outlook. He takes care and looks after his family, not just his family and his kids, but their families as well. So it's a long-term view of things. And it does apply to grandparents, obviously, but the principle is much broader than that. To not use up everything you have in your own pursuits, but to think ahead and to invest in the future generations. So a good man does not spend everything on himself, but invests into his children and grandchildren. You have an opportunity to have a tremendous impact on future generations with everything that God has blessed you with. Not just teaching and the experience that you have in conveying that, which we are supposed to do, but even with the things that we have. So that is a wonderful verse that is there for us. And the next one is Proverbs 17:6. Proverbs 17 and verse 6. And this is one that we have come across before. Proverbs 17:6, children's children are the crown of old men, and the glory of children are their fathers. We talked about this at the beginning. We also mentioned it when we talked about mothers and fathers in that class, and then we are kind of just mentioning it again because we've gone through this already. But children's children are the crown of old men. There is a tremendous, it's a symbol of status for a grandparent to have grandchildren, to have a lot of grandchildren. It fills their heart with joy, and it's almost more like a statement than anything else, but it is just a wonderful thing, because a crown is it's a symbol of status. And part of a grandparent's reward is their grandchildren. Just like parents are blessed by their child acting wisely, grandparents get a blessing and an encouragement and a feeling of status when they have grandchildren. Now, grandparents, don't take that to mean that you should put pressure on your children to have more children and to push them to that. I don't think that's what it's meaning, and I do kind of say that in jest, but that's what the verse says. Children's children are the crown of old men. There's a great symbol of status that comes for a grandparent when they have children or when they have grandchildren. Now back to Proverbs 6 and verse 19. There's a few verses that deal with brothers specifically, but they apply to all siblings. So Proverbs 6 and verse 19. A false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among the brethren. Now that seems kind of disjointed, but we'll read the last few verses to get the tied together look at what he's talking about. Verse 16 says, These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination to him. He mentions a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, an heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that are swift in running to mischief, and a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. This is a list of things that the Lord hates and abhors. Very strong language that is there. And verse 19 points out that we should not be someone who pushes people toward conflict. One of the things that God especially makes a note of, that he absolutely hates, he just abhors it, is someone who pushes others into conflict. Otherwise known as pushing people's buttons. And it's in here in the category of brethren, the word there, and it's talking about the people that are around you, not just family, but oftentimes siblings and family most especially know how to push the buttons of their siblings, and a lot of times it is, well, without throwing personal opinion in there, just the fact is, pushing people's buttons, pushing people to conflict, to frustration, to anger, is something that God hates. And that's very, very strong language. So if you are someone who just loves to push people's buttons, don't. God hates that. He abhors it. One of the things that I love about the book of Proverbs is that it gives us an idea, an even greater understanding of what makes God tick. How he functions, the things that he likes, dislikes, the things that matter to him. You find so much of that in Proverbs. And here he says, I want to tell you a few things that I really hate. One of them is somebody who's constantly pushing people's buttons, pushing people into conflict. Proverbs 17 and verse 17. A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Now, for a long time, I misinterpreted this verse. What I read was, friends love you at all times, brothers are just there to butt heads and always be in battle. And that's not what it is talking about. This isn't brothers are born to be in conflict. This is brothers are born to be there when you're in conflict. I read a number of different commentaries and really looked at the verse, and that is what they believe the thrust of this is to be. Not that friends are great and brothers are to be at war with, but a friend loves all the time, but when things are the toughest, that is when a brother is going to be there. And that is often true. I mean, you see this, I've seen this before. Somebody starts picking on your brother or your younger brother or something, and it's the older brother that steps up and says, nobody picks on my younger brother but me. When things are really kind of getting in butting heads, that's when, a sibling, a brother really kind of stands up for each other. And they're there. When that stuff really kind of gets tough, that's when they step in. Whereas it says, a friend loveth at all times. They're kind of there all the time. They can be. A good friend can be there all the time. But when things really get tough, that is often when a brother is really there and when that family connection really kind of comes in, whether you're friends with them, close friends with them, or not. So there's more than just the verse saying, friends are great, brothers are going to be at war all the time. That's not its purpose in saying that. Proverbs 18 and verse 19, just a short way over. Proverbs 18 and verse 19, a brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. This is a very serious one. And we have to take great care, we have to take great care to prevent conflict in our families. Because the closeness in our families makes wounds the hardest to deal with and the most difficult to overcome. So when there's an issue, when there is a problem, be even quicker to deal with things in your family, because those wounds often cut the deepest because they're the closest to you. Family is a very, very, very close relationship, and it requires an even greater amount, because of the closeness, it requires an even greater amount of caution and input. So very quickly, if you have any problems, deal with them very, very quickly. Deal with them as soon as they pop up. Because as it says, a brother offended, it's harder than trying to assault a city, a walled city. Trying to mend a relationship with a brother that's been offended is like just trying to assault a huge wall city. And so when conflict is small, deal with that. Don't push buttons. Don't create conflict in a family. Don't relish in that, because those relationships are very close and it's very tough to mend things in that close of a relationship. Just a few verses down from that in Proverbs 18:24. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly, and there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. First of all, in order to have friends, you must be friendly. You're not going to make friends if you're not friendly yourself. You're just going to drive people away. And then there's no sense after you drive everybody away to bemoan the fact, I don't have any friends. Well, perhaps you should have been friendly. So it's just a very simple thing. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly. You've got to work on those things. In order to have friends, you must be friendly. And if you have friends, you've got to work on that. The last half, there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother, helps and kind of transitions and says, but working on that, investing, being friendly is worth it, because they can become closer to you than your own family. There's a great emphasis in Proverbs on family, and there's a wonderful injection here, saying that it's possible if you invest, if you show yourself friendly, if you work on friendships, that those relationships can become so strong that you can become even closer than you are with your own family. That doesn't diminish family. It just means you can have such a closeness when you invest yourself in those relationships. So if you want a strong friendship, be friendly. Invest yourself in that, because those relationships can become even closer than your own family at times. Again, just a few verses on from that, in Proverbs 19 and verse 7, all the brethren of the poor do hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He pursueth them with words, yet they are wanting to him. There's a couple different things going on here, and again, these are general principles. They won't happen all the time, These are general principles that the Bible gives to us. Someone who is poor can have difficulty interacting with friends and family who are not poor. We have to watch out for that. There is a caution for those who are not poor to be careful in the relationship that you have. There's also a caution here to those who are poor in to not constantly be looking for handouts. There is, when you honestly and truly have needs, it's very natural for us to go to those that we trust and to go to our friends and to our family. And I believe what's being talked about here is that incessant, I need stuff. Can I have this? Can I have this? There's always a constant need there. That can be difficult for friendships when there is a constant need. As it says there at the end, he pursueth them with words, yet they are wanting to him. This isn't just, a poor person who's just kind of dealing with, this is somebody who has become needy and is always looking for a handout. And when that takes place, it makes it very difficult for friends and for family. If there are genuine needs, then it's not saying don't ever talk about them. It's just saying when there is that constant talking, when there's a pursuing of people with words, hey, I need this, hey, I need this, I don't have this, I need this and I need this. As that goes on and as that kind of continues, it becomes difficult on a friendship, it becomes difficult on family. So, someone who is poor can have difficulty interacting with friends and family who are not poor. When you have money, be aware of that. Be aware that you have to work on that. You have to be careful not to get worn out by that. And if you have need, don't badger people with it, because that can work and it can be difficult on friends and family. Next, Proverbs 27 and verse 10. Thine own friend and thy father's friend forsake not. Neither go into thy brother's house in the day of thy calamity, for better is a neighbor that is near than a brother far off. Again, there's so much in the book of Proverbs. We could spend a long time on a lot of these different things. So please understand, I'm not covering everything. This is an overview of the topics, not an exposition of each verse, because we could spend a long time on so many of these verses. But I want to read what one of the commentaries said about this verse. It says, there are times when long-term friendships are more dependable than blood relationships. Again, there is an understanding that we shouldn't seek to stress our family relationships. And because someone is family, we should not always expect them to bear the weight, to deal with a responsibility. It's sometimes better to rely on a friend than it is to to be constantly putting pressure on a family for needs and for everything. So sometimes it's better, and it can be better. There are times when that long-term friendship is more dependable than a blood relationship. It's not always the case, but often it is. Because people are family, they often expect or demand too much from each other. Because we're family, of course you should do this. And when there's a lot of that takes place, it wears on that family relationship. So when things, completely fall apart, and when you have trouble, it's sometimes best to go to a close friend than it is to constantly have an expectation for your family. Again, there's so much that's in these verses, and we're just dealing very quickly with them. Moving on now to the topic, there's topic of widows. Proverbs has a couple verses that deal with widows and some helps for us there in Proverbs 15 and verse 25. The Lord will destroy the house of the proud, but he will establish the border of the widow. God takes special notice and care of widows. In Israel, widows often could not look after themselves. Their husband was dead for some reason, something happened, and often there was not a job that they had to go out and make money. They worked and they were able to do things, but it was not easy. And so widows, God just includes in Proverbs and throughout the Word of God, just takes special care and notice of widows. He watches out for them. And here in specific, it was somebody who's trying to take advantage of a widow being by herself and not able to defend her borders, and they would slowly encroach on her land. They would start moving those landmarks to take away land, to cheat her out of what was hers because they could take advantage. And God says, I notice that. And he takes special notice and care of widows. I included this. Those who don't need God find him an enemy. Those who know they need God find a friend. The proud person in our verse thinks they can stand on their own. They look at what they have and they become proud of what they are able to accomplish. They have no need for God. And in the end of it, they'll find that God is going to destroy their house. But a widow is in a position where she has to rely on someone else. And God says, that's me. I'll establish, I watch over, I will eventually take care of those. I notice what is done. Those who don't need God find him an enemy. Those who know they need God find a friend. There's also a verse in Proverbs 23 that deals with a similar, and it was worded in a similar way. Proverbs 23, 10 and 11. Remove not the old landmark, and enter not into the field of the fatherless. For their Redeemer is mighty, he shall plead their cause with thee. As with widows, God takes special care and notice of orphans, and will repay those who take advantage of them. Again, this is talking about the land. And in Israel, there were landmarks, and every family had their plot, their area that was theirs. When a person was an orphan or when there was a widow, oftentimes people around them would want to take advantage of them, and then they would move those landmarks. They would move them to restrict their land because they could. They were taking advantage. God says, I will look after them, and I notice those things. I am their Redeemer. I will speak for them. So if you are taking advantage of widows and orphans, God says, I will repay that. God takes special notice and care, and will not allow people to take advantage of them without repercussions. Eventually, God will deal with that and pay that back. Then a couple general verses here, as I believe we're getting close to the end here. Yes, Proverbs 22 and verse 28. Again, in the same vein, remove not the ancient landmark which thy fathers have set. And then, as we saw in Proverbs 23:10, remove not the old landmark. One of the things that we find out about God, and again, as I said earlier, one of my favorite things about the book of Proverbs is you find out the things that matter to God, the things that he is interested in. And one of the things that you notice, specifically with the children of Israel, is that God is concerned about them having their land. God is interested in their land, in the children of Israel having a place. God's not just a spiritual being who is out there and all he cares about is the spirit, and nothing on this world really matters to him. He just cares about the spirit stuff. But that's not the case. God is interested in, God is concerned with, God talks about land. Talks about how to use it and how to manage it well. He talks about the importance of it. He talks about the landmarks that they have and making sure that people aren't taken advantage of, that the land that they had was not taken from them, and that widows and orphans weren't taken advantage of and people encroaching on them and stealing from them. And you get a sense when you go through the book of Proverbs and the rest of the Bible as well, that having land mattered to God. Having a place where his people could build their homes, having a place and having a land of their own, that mattered to God. And you just get a sense, you get an understanding a little bit more every time you go into the Word of God to understand the things that matter to God. You learn a little bit more about his character, about what's important to him. And when he looked at his children, when he looked at the people of Israel, the land mattered. It mattered that they have some place to call home. And there were a tremendous amount of laws that were in place to make sure that the family didn't lose that land. That they had a place to put their homes. And that they had a place to raise their families. Land mattered to God. You get a picture of this. And as you go through this, whether you have land or not, you get an understanding of this is what matters to God. This is a little bit more about who he is, what he enjoys, the things that he hates, the things that he abhors, and the things that are important to him. So as you go through these, as you look at these verses, that's one of the greatest things that we can see and learn. The character of God is throughout the Word of God. And everywhere you turn, we can learn a little bit more about him. Oh, this is what he loves. These are some things that he doesn't like. These are some things that are important to him. And I love the book of Proverbs for that very reason, because it gives us such a practical understanding of the character of God. He's not just some outside superhuman force in heaven, but he is a very real God. And we can come to know him and see his character, see his likes and his dislikes in a book like Proverbs when we go through here and see our God and the things that matter to him. We'll close off with that today. We'll jump into a brand new topic next week, but so glad that you're able to come and to join us this morning. God bless you, and we'll see you later.